So I'm going to assume that you have some passing familiarity with Path of Exile and its lore and story, because otherwise why would you have clicked on this video? I'm going to be critiquing what we have rather than giving an explanation or any in-depth analysis of what's going on. So if you were expecting something else, I'm sorry to disappoint you. But let's start at the very beginning. Our very first introduction to the game is the character selection screen, and we have a brief voiceover explaining that we have in fact been exiled. We then choose our character class and we get a brief blurb explaining what our character is and why they may have been exiled in the first place. It's after this that we immediately find ourselves waking up on a beach in Rayclast and encountering a Exile who explains that we are the only survivors before immediately being killed by an animated corpse. It's lovely stuff, and it gets us right off the bat with that sort of this is a dark RPG sort of vibe, which is wonderful. He gives us a clear goal to start off with, that we want to go to Lionel's Watch, and we get a brief character blurb. Depending on which character you've chosen, it's going to be different, but it amounts to, I'm going to survive this. This is sort of, I feel, a wasted opportunity, because this brief character blurb could simply be changed so that the character line was something more akin to, you may have exiled me for now, but I'll be back in Oriath before you know it. Sort of establishing that our character has a clear overarching motivation. I feel like this has been missing from the game, and you'll see how that hurts later on, and this simple fix here could have easily given our character a motivation that drives them forward throughout the entire game. But for now, we don't have an overarching motivation, but we are given at least some guidance and something to drive our character forward, namely to survive, and it looks like there may be other survivors up the beach. So we continue on our way, slaying zombies, etc, etc, until we defeat Hillock, making our way into Lionel's Watch. Now here's where we get our first bit of lore, environmental lore anyway, in the Letters of Exile. These are really a nice bit of lore. They have a collection of various exiles, and though you have to click on them multiple times and just hope that you get all of the lore, it's available, and it does a nice little bit of world building here. Apart from having characters like Hillock be mentioned so that you can see their crimes, there is a sort of mixture of these two types of exiles. You've got exiles who are exiled for good reason, like Hillock, and then you've got exiles who are exiled for things that we, as the civilized people that we are in this day and age, would agree really aren't crimes and should not be punished. So it sort of presents to us the idea that Oriath and its society are corrupt. And then of course we've got all of the lore which is attached to our variety of NPCs. We can talk to them and they're going to give us quests like retrieving a medicine chest and pointing out how difficult it is to survive in Rayclast. We're also going to get a variety of quests such as clearing out the fetid pool in order to discover why the undead are rising up. We get lore about the savages and cannibals who are on the beach, etc, etc. None of this really helps drive our character by giving them a clear motivation for what's going on, other than general survival, which is okay but not great. It would be nice if our characters mentioned that if you ever want to get back to Oriath, then you're going to have to help us so that you can survive. I don't care how powerful you are or how powerful you think you are, you're not going to be able to survive Rayclast. Eventually you'll have to sleep. You need someone to watch your back, and that could be us. This would help establish that yes, our character does eventually want to get out of Rayclast. This is not like, well, I'm just going to make the best out of a bad situation, I guess, and live in Rayclast. Theirs is an ambition to be, this is not going to be my life, I will move forward. Again, clear character motivations. If returning to Oriath is the ultimate goal, then we have been given a clear motivation and then have that reinforced here. We kill our necromancer, we retrieve our medicine chest, we get a little bit more lore. Some of it feels a bit side questy, but the first part, yeah, can help establish that Rayclast is a bit of a rough place to live. We are then given the quest to kill the Dweller in the Deep, who is living out in the Submerged Passage, in a side section of that. It's a nice quest, and we encounter some sirens and whatnot. At this point, I think we could start building up our big bad for this particular act, and that's Mervale the Siren. We don't really get much build up for her beforehand until we actually get very close to where she is, and that's a shame. One of the things that Diablo 2 did quite well was build up its act boss. You had a clear idea of your progression, you had an overarching plot, which was to seek out the Dark Wanderer / Diablo, and you also had sort of an act goal, which was to reach, say, the monastery and cleanse it of evil so that you can progress the main goal, which was, of course, get Diablo. Path of Exile doesn't really build up Mervale the way that Andariel was built up in Act 1 of Diablo 2, and that's a shame because it would be just so great if you've got this idea of Mervale, she's been built up in your mind, and then you encounter her, and yeah, that's not there. But it could be by changing the Deep Dweller quest and tying it more into the lore. Don't make it a side quest, use it as a reason to build up this character, and do it simply by moving the Brood Princess out of the Submerged Passage and just switching her with the Deep Dweller, because the Deep Dweller is just a crab. The Brood Princess can be implied as a threat of the sirens spreading down the coast and reaching Lionai's Watch and becoming a problem. This can allow us to talk to the NPCs who will be, oh no, Mervale is moving down the coast. She's a big bad, she's a threat, we don't want to have to deal with her. Hopefully by slaying the Brood Princess you've pushed her back, because she's dangerous, she could really kill us all, this is bad. That sort of build-up. We could also use that as some build-up at this point for Brutus, who is coming up by saying that before now this particular stretch of the coast has been reasonably safe because Mervale's in Siren's Cove is blocked from spreading by Brutus, who is also a really nasty piece of work. That sort of thing allows you to integrate the quest into the main storyline, while also building up two threats which the character is going to encounter soon, without necessarily needing to, you know, just spell it out, you know. You're allowing the Brood Princess to do the talking for you, and especially if you give her some buffs and make her more of an interesting mini-boss, you could have an implied threat by saying that the Brood Princess is a servant of Mervale. Mervale is obviously stronger by being the boss, but that boss, mini-boss, was reasonably tough, so how much tougher is her mother? That sort of implication, and therefore also how much tougher must be Brutus to hold them back. These sort of things. The environmental lore with the Karui is lovely. I've got no problems there. It sort of establishes that Rayclast was not always this way, that there was a cataclysm, and it gives us something that happens to Kaum, while also building up the Karui, introducing them to us and introducing us to Kaum in the first place, so that we have a taste of him early in the game, and that sort of allows us to build up an image of him as we progress through into later acts, where we'll encounter him later. So we progress and we meet Brutus in the prison, we kill him, we also meet Piety. I think that this is sort of a wasted opportunity here, as we could have introduced more lore in this area relating to Chevron, but also relating to Brutus. Put out edicts from the warden in just little lore scrolls throughout the prison area that sort of spell out why Brutus is brutal, you know? This sort of thing that says, wow, this guy is really terrible and evil. You could also use this to build up Chevron a bit more, because I do feel like this is the only mention we get of her, and we get the mention that she was killed by Brutus, which is, since he is the first real boss in the game, does Chevron a disservice, because when we encounter her later, it's not that she in turn has been built up as one of the Godless Three, and therefore really powerful, but rather that our only real interaction with her is that prior to her encounter, is that she was killed by the easiest boss in the game, Brutus. That's not a particularly good build-up for her, so maybe some more lore for her along the way. It's nice to have Malachi being mentioned after we kill Brutus in the prison. That bit of lore. I love his voice actor and the fact that he's sort of got that, it's just so calm and collected when he talks about things. He's fantastic. I like the fact that he can speak about sort of just so casually about things which should be terrible, but he speaks so casually of them, and his voice actor just does such a wonderful job that it really helps build Malachi's character, that he speaks so calmly and casually of terrible things. Not that that first scroll with Malachi really does that. It could be perhaps more brutal, casually mentioning people as if they were objects, sort of like, "Dear Chevron, I have sent you another shipment of materials, young, strong and pliable flesh, which should yield more interesting results for your sublime arts." The casual sort of references here, if we could help build up Malachi as just being generally cruel by the fact that he is so calm and collected, and calmly referencing to people as things and tools to be used for his purposes. Not that that's necessarily needed. He is built up somewhat. This is our first encounter with him, and we have plenty of other opportunities to build up Malachi. We'll talk about him more when we get to that sort of area of the game. But Chevron is weakly built up. Brutus really gets no build up. There is some mention, if you go back to town, of Brutus being in the prison, but there's no build up for him. We're also completely lacking any mention of Piety. She's a major figure within Oriathan society. I mean, she is the right hand of Dominus, and Dominus is not some low-ranking nobody Templar. So why is her being in Axiom prison not something that's mentioned at all? Like, there's no lore, there's no thing to go, you encountered Piety? Well, this is who Piety is. It feels like a missed opportunity, and again, it's something that could be used to sort of build motivation for our character by having Piety be something that we're going to be chasing after. I just feel like that's really a missed opportunity, and it's a shame. But we kill Brutus, we encounter Piety a second time when she seals the path inland. Really, at this point, I'm starting to feel like, well, why do I need to go inland? Is it because surviving on the coast is hard? It's not because of gameplay, but it could be mentioned that food is hard to come by, there's an abundance of corruption, there's an abundance of undead, and that life is easier, and the food is more plentiful in the inland areas. Tarkley sort of hints at this, but never really says it, and we're still not really given any motivation for why we are proceeding to Act 2, and it's at this point that we really start to notice and it starts to hurt. Fairgraves introduces us to Mervale. Generally, he is the first that I hear of Mervale. You might hear about her from alternate sources in town, depending on when you go back. Generally, I talk to Fairgraves first when I go through my very first game. I talked to Fairgraves. He was what revealed who Mervale was and her backstory. It's nice to have it there and sort of that sort of thing, but we've had no build-up or mention of Mervale, despite the fact that she is the big bad of this act. And I feel like that's a real shame, because Mervale is actually a really interesting boss, both lore-wise and, like, I enjoy her mechanically. She's simple, but she's very cool. She sets the stage as an interesting boss fight, provided that you don't kill her in a couple of seconds, which unfortunately, ever since I've been not a noob, I've been able to do. But her lore is interesting. The fact that there is just the little hints like the illusion versions of Mervale luring you into her lair, the implications that all the undead mariners that we've fought our way through are victims of Mervale still lingering within Siren's Cove. That's a nice touch, and that could be added to something like Fairgrave's lore that he gives you, or even one of the NPCs in town. It's like, if you need to know how dangerous Mervale is, you've probably been fighting your way through the undead that haunt that area. They're all that remains of Mervale's victims. That's why you shouldn't go out there unless you really want to join them. That could be cool. Another way to help build up Mervale's encounter. The story and lore for Mervale, good. Then we move into Act 2. Act 2 is a mess. It's terrible. We still have no motivation for why our character wants to move forward. Why are they progressing? What is our ultimate goal? And I think this really hurts Act 2, because while Act 1 sort of had goals that weren't great, but they did the job well enough, by the time we hit Act 2, our character still has no clear purpose. And most of the activities in Act 2, even though that the ones that we need to progress within, like the main quest line, feel like side quests. They feel disjointed, disconnected, and a lot of stuff is left in a sort of, why am I doing this sort of condition. The Great White Beast, and I can't remember what the name of the one where you get the golden hand is. I can't remember what the name of that quest. Those are fine as just side quests. The golden hand quest is just, it can be a little long, considering that it's such a large and branched off side area. That's really the only criticism I can have there. It does give us some backstory on Joffrey and the Purity Rebellion, which is nice. The environmental lore in the Crossroads is wonderful. It sort of builds on the idea of the Cataclysm that was introduced by the Calrui lore, but from the perspective of the Eternal Citizens. And I really like that. The Bandit quest again feels like a side quest, despite the fact that it is actually a vital quest in this area. It does sort of present that maybe exiles would have a better time surviving in Act 2, since they seem to form a reasonably large part of the enemy base, are bandits of some sort. So that's nice, I guess. But yeah, it's a mess. The main quest line, however, sees us go to the Chamber of Sins. We're introduced to the notion of Malagaro and Fidelitis, and it's sort of a nice touch. It gives us some idea of what Malagaro was like, that he would transform his lover and someone who he really loved into a monster. That's great. We also get some more information on Malachi. Again, I would just love it for Malachi to be a little darker. He just seems calm and collected, like he's a totally reasonable guy, which does, in a way, build into his own lore and the fact that he convinces a lot of people, like Vol, by being so calm and collected. But it would be nice to at least more of a hint that Malachi is a monster and what he's really after, because he does seem very calm and very reasonable in his current form, which is okay. Like I said, we'll talk more about Malachi. Really should talk more about Malachi later. We kill Fidelitis, we get his spike, we stop Piety from getting it. Helena tells us that she was after the Baleful Gem and Malagaro's spike. And can we find the spike? We can. It's just so conveniently in the Weaver's Chambers, which is another side area with a lair, and we unseal the passage back to Lion Eye's Watch, which feels a bit okay. Again, side questy. The fact that we have to go to the Weaver's Chambers to get the spike feels side questy, and then we have to go into the Val Ruins using the spike. And it's at this point that I have to ask the question, why? Why do we need to use the spike to go into the Val Ruins? We've got no reason to go there unless I'm like missing something obvious, and I have the achievements for getting all the lore and all the NPCs to give me all of their dialogue, so I did go through it to make sure that I wasn't in fact missing something. But yeah, I have the spike and I have the gem, and Piety isn't trying to get them back from me. She can't, so why do I need to use them to go and kill Lorata so I can go into the Val Ruins? It doesn't make sense. You could say that maybe it's because I'm trying to get to San, but why would going into the Val Ruins get me to San? Other exiles, as we see when we reach Act 3, make it to San just fine without going that particular way. I'm the only one who goes via the Val Pyramid to get into San. So why do I need to? There must be another pathway. It just doesn't make sense. Especially because I have no clear goal. This is where it really hurts the story. I don't have a clear goal to say, your goal is to do this, and that's why you do this. My character has no reason to kill Lorata and no reason to use the spike. I should just hold on to them, or possibly throw them off the dam so that they sink into the water and no one can ever recover them. Why use them? And that also begs the question, why do I break the Ancient Seal and release the Val Oversoul? Again, why would I do that? What gain does it give me, other than the fact that it's this giant evil magical seal is my way, especially since the voice line from my characters is immediate regret when you do it, unless you're someone like the witch who goes, well, isn't that interesting? The Marauder is like, oh, ancestors forgive me. The Scion is also upset. Why do they do it then? Just because I have to for the game to progress. Doesn't make sense. They need to give me a story reason. It's at this point that I would like to say, give Piety some way of getting the spike and the gem instead of me, so that my motivation is to chase after her, to stop her from doing the bad thing that she's going to do, and she breaks the seal, and now it's up to me to put things right. That at least gives me some sort of sensible motivation. But proceeding, we now have done, hopefully, the quests for the bandits. We have the Apex, and we can go into the Val Pyramid, where we fight the Val Oversoul, who, again, we have had no lore for the Val, so he's a little confusing at this point. And we use the Apex, and it comes up in the middle of the city of San. The first time I went through this, I found this entire section to be very confusing. I had just come out in the middle of the city of San, and I was like, wait, I thought I was in an ancient pyramid somewhere in the jungle. What the hell is going on? Who was the Val Oversoul, and why did I kill him? Who are the Val? None of this lore is available to contextualize it within Act 2, but you do get it in Act 3 later. But that's also a problem because it's in the library, and it's random. There's a lot of lore in the library in Act 3. It explains this stuff, but you might not necessarily get it the first time through, and unless you read a guide to check where all the lore that you were missing was, you wouldn't necessarily know that it's in the library and that it's just got a random chance of having spawned. So I would like to propose a research center, an outpost, or something where there are exiled scholars that may be doing something, and maybe I take the spike to them and they have some lore which helps contextualize the Val, who the Val are, why the pyramid is underneath the city of San, and why, you know, what the Val Oversoul is. We do learn this stuff later if you're willing to look for that lore and you get lucky in the library. We get that stuff, but it doesn't contextualize, and it's very confusing that first time you go through. So I would prefer that that lore be shifted backwards to help contextualize that, sort of establish why these things are, you know, important, why I should not be like, well, there's so many monsters roaming around, why does having the Val Oversoul out there doing anything at all? Why does it matter? You could have made it interesting by like, while the Val Oversoul is out, the areas prior to that, if you go back to them while it's dark, the monsters are buffed or changed, or there's some other effect to say, the Val Oversoul has just made Breaklast a whole lot more dangerous, and that sort of thing. So environmental storytelling of that sort to imply that, yeah, this is dangerous, this is a threat. You don't really have to do anything to change the balance values of the areas after that, because we could imply that they were always dangerous like that, the way that they are now. Because after the Vile Ruins, obviously, we can't access any of the areas after the Vile Ruins without breaking the seals. You can just be like, well, these guys were always like that, but dangerous, but the ones that we've already encountered before, we imply that they are made stronger by the Vile Oversoul, having been released in this evil darkness spreading across the land. That sort of thing. I'd also like it if we could deliver that spike somewhere for safekeeping, and then Piety manages to get it, or when we kill the Weaver, you know, just give us an area with that lore in it. And she doesn't have to steal the... We don't have to deliver the spike somewhere for her to steal it, and the Blackguards to become, you know, put themselves directly opposed to us and say, we're clearly your enemies. You could have it so that when you kill the Weaver, it sort of, instead of just dying, it limps off somewhere to die, and you chase it, and Piety's there, and she gets the spike, so that she can release... And she already had the Baleful Gem, to be like, I've got what I came for, and then she kills Lorata, she releases the Vile Oversoul, because she has a motivation for the bad stuff that she does, and that she's researching the thaumaturgy for her ultimate end goal. So she could do that, and it would vastly improve Act 2's story so that it makes sense, but we still need to be able to give our character a motivation to drive them forward, because it does feel like when they enter Act 2, they have no clear overarching goal, and it feels much like they're just wandering around like an idiot, because it's a game, and the story is not giving me the drive that I want. So those are just some improvements for Act 2. When we go to Act 3, we've given a clear motivation right off the bat. We've got to rescue Tolman, and helping out the people in the Sun encampment is in our best interests, because exiles stick together and you've still got to have someone watch your back, etc, etc. We start to see more of Piety and her terrible experiments. Grigor gives us the information about what she's been up to and what's going on and why it's so bad. Our character still lacks the overall motivation to care, but we can sort of get well, these are the guys who sort of screwed you over by sending you into exile, so you might want some vengeance. So that at least sort of works more than the other way. We get a lot of lore. We're introduced to the guys like Gaius Centauri and Hector Tertusius, who aren't really built up that much here. It does give us some backstory as to the state of the Empire by the fact that if you get the lore which tells you why like Centauri and Tertusius were so awful, the fact that the platinum busts retrieved in a quest, celebrating them implies that these guys are monsters, but their monstrous actions are appreciated by the Emperor and by extension the Empire, and that's why the Purity Rebellion is so important. And it also helps tie in that all these guys who are on the Imperial side against the Rebellion are evil by their nature and what they're doing. So that's cool. That's a very actually nice piece of storytelling. It's a nice touch because it doesn't spell out directly, hey guys, the Empire is evil, but it sort of says these men did these actions and you go, wow, that's terrible, but the Empire is celebrating them for that. There's a lot of lore here, there's a lot of good stuff going on. We've given a clear build-up of Piety as our bad guy and our goal to fight her and put her down. And because of our encounters throughout the game, Piety has been introduced and we know about her. We know what she wants and her motivations. We understand her. We've got a clear goal. It's wonderful. Piety is perhaps the best built-up villain in the game. And it's great that we chase after her. It feels like we would have a reason to do so. And yeah, that build-up, the fact that you're working towards this encounter with Piety, it's the big showdown. It's finally time to go up against the Mistress of Corruption. Good stuff. What doesn't make sense is that Dominus is not given any build-up at all, other than the fact that you got to kill him shortly after killing Piety. Piety doesn't feel like a mid-boss, she feels like a 3/4 boss, because she's so close to Dominus right at the end. You come out of the temple, you go walk through an area to get into the gardens, there's the Tower of God right there, and Dominus is in that area. That's not enough separation to give us enough time to build up Dominus. Since Piety has already been so well built up, we could start to build up Dominus through Act 3, possibly giving us some orders and stuff for the Blackguards in Act 2, just so we can get an idea that Dominus is a bad guy and help build up a motivation for why we would want to kill him. Because I don't care about him, and I don't have this motivation. It's like, yeah, it's time to take him down. I care about defeating Piety, because she has been built up as a villain, and I have a reason to want to fight her. I don't have that with Dominus. It's completely missing from the game. He feels tacked on, and much of this is probably because during the beta, just the way that went, Piety was sort of the big bad, and then Dominus really was sort of just added in there. He doesn't work. There's no mention of any of his lieutenants who are there, like Octavia, Sparkfist, and etc, etc. Those guys, if they had got some sort of mention as well, just to help tie it in, yeah, that fight could be far more interesting. There is sort of lore which helps imply that things like the Virtue Gems, something beyond. They've got motivations of their own, but that depends on if you've got certain items which have descriptions. I think it's Doriani's Fist which has the description that says virtually like to be held. I'm not sure. It's one of his items. There is lore in Act 2 in the Chamber of Sins, which explains that working with the Virtue Gems is like working a puppet with strings made of fibers. It implies that they're evil, and that's possibly what has corrupted Dominus. But you could leave that sort of Dominus becoming an Ascendant, Dominus Ascendant as being like a mystery to drive you forward through Act 4, because Act 4 also feels like it's a disconnect from the rest of the game. In Motivation, you can sort of understand a basic revenge plot against Dominus and his ilk that would drive you to go and seek out and kill the High Templar, despite the fact that we're not given a clear motivation for our character. What we're not given is a reason why we should care enough to go after whatever is in Highgate. It's never actually explained to us that Malachi went to Highgate with Vol. In fact, I had assumed that the Purity Rebellion had simply been destroyed in the Cataclysm along with everything else, and that Malachi himself was dead along with the rest of the Empire, and that is sort of what had gone wrong. There's really very little build up for the other characters involved in this. Like Deshret is mentioned briefly in a story about the Red Sakema's saddle, which again is an optional piece of lore that you've got a chance of getting in the library, and I missed the first time through, and I didn't realise that was in fact there and it had a chance to spawn. But again, there's no implication that the Empire had continued after the Purity Rebellion, especially when you're given the lore later on that Kalm and the Marakath and the Ezamites had fought as part of the Purity Rebellion, and then Kalm's kingdom is afflicted by the Black Spirit. It sort of gives an implication that this had happened all sort of like the Karui were fighting on the coast, and then the Black Spirit came in while they were still a conquering, rather than Vol reigned for 5 years after the end of the rebellion, and then the Cataclysm happens. That sort of doesn't make sense. And so when we move into Act 4 and we're introduced that, oh no, Vol and stuff, they're still around. The Cataclysm didn't like happen the way that maybe you were thinking it happened. The direct cause of the Cataclysm, of course, is worked into the lore of Act 4 just fine. But again, sort of, why did I care about Malachi? I didn't even realize that he was still alive at this point. it's now time to speak of him. Vol is a character who has been somewhat built up in the first thing. Yeah, I just said I was talking about Malachi, but we're working our way through Act 4, don't worry about it. Vol has been somewhat built up as the Emperor of Purity, and as sort of the minor boss of the second area into Act 4, he's fine as he is. His confession sort of explains that he would have done anything to destroy Thaumaturgy, and that's why he has allowed himself to become corrupt, because of Malachi's promises to destroy Thaumaturgy. And this also implies, of course, that Malachi is still alive, which we didn't know before. So we go into Highgate, we go down into the mines. There's not very much lore relating to Highgate mines at this point. We know that underneath Mount Veruso is where they sealed the Tears of Magi, which are the Val's virtue gems. So it's never actually told. I didn't realize initially that Mount Veruso and Highgate is in Mount Veruso. It's like, that's not something that clicked the first time through. So more clarification there, of course. We go down, we discover that the Nightmare is defending itself for some reason with Calm and Dureso. It really seems like this is kind of a dumb reason to have them outside, because you need to defeat them in order to get the keys that will let you through. And it's sort of implied that the keys are aspects of Calm and Dureso, their desire and their fury, which will power the rapture, which will allow you to go through. And since Malachi is the one who is currently like taking the reins of the beast, and he's the one who created the rapture device, you'd think that you would know that you could get to him using the rapture device with those two guardians. Why are they there? Just get rid of them and no one can get through that crystal wall. You couldn't. It would be better if it had been implied that those two like keys, the Eye of Fury and the Eye of Desire, always existed, but Malachi was worried that someone would take them and use them on the rapture device, which he couldn't destroy himself because he needed to use it and then immediately enter the beast in order to take up the reins of power. That since these already existed, he therefore summoned up both Calm and Dureso's spirits and bound them to guard one of the treasures unwittingly, so that no one could follow him in. I think that makes more sense, because in the way that it's implied currently is that Dureso and Calm are put there to be guardians, but simultaneously, if they weren't there, you wouldn't be able to get Desire and Fury to power the rapture device, so the gate doesn't open. So it would actually make more sense for them not to be there from the bad guy's perspective. That's just something that I want to throw out there. Obviously we progress into the Belly of the Beast, we go to the Harvest, and it's time to fight Malachi. We fight Piety. She's revealed that, you know, bad stuff. It's all good. I have no problems with Piety. She's wonderful. She's built up well. This sort of change of heart and the way that she's seen how things have gone based on the actions of Malachi, and sort of like her change in heart, but not quite. She's like, look, I'm still going to do what I was always planning on doing, but I've changed my mind just about the how rather than the why. That's cool. We get sort of a more of a build up of the Godless 3, and it's not great. I'm going to criticize the Godless 3 and the fact that they didn't have enough build up. Chevron is the worst, because the only thing that we have to sort of imply why she would be a threat is that she created Brutus and then was killed by him, but he's the first real boss in the game and we killed him. He's the easiest boss. So trying to build her up by saying like, it's Chevron of Umbra. You mean the one who got beat by the easiest boss in the game? Yes, that's how scary she is. It would be nice if there was sort of more of a build up for her. But that's minor problems, really. That's just me. Malagaro has somewhat more of a build-up, not in terms of power, but in terms of just the fact that he's cruel. The implication that the fact that his lover became Fidelitis at his own hands implies his nature as, you know, he's a monster. And that's well implied just by that. So, Malagaro, okay. Doedri. Deirdre is burnt as a witch. She's a witch. I didn't realise that she was evil, or that she in fact worked for Malachi, because it's... I know that she was burnt at a stake by Vol in the Purity Rebellion. That's all I really knew about her coming into this. That's her build-up, that's it. Yeah, she could really do with some more, because it seemed like she was a very minor character rather than an important part of Malachi's plans and designs. We kill Malachi, and... sorry, the Godless 3, and we go in to fight Malachi. This is sort of my problem with Act 4, is that, why do I care? I don't know that Malachi is trying to incite a second cataclysm so that he can reshape the world, until I actually get to him. So that is a motivation to stop him, is lacking. When it comes to his build-up, he has seemed fairly calm and reasonable, very calculating, etc., which is good. His voice actor was wonderful when you read his notes. I think that if they could make him, like, I would just love to hear that voice referring to casual violence, sort of like casual day-to-day stuff, to sort of build up that Malachi is more of a bad guy, because it does seem like he's not that bad of a guy, which for a boss that's like, I'm going to destroy the entire world, doesn't really do it for me. But the fact that he's so calm, collected, and seems so reasonable is also good, because he's supposed to have convinced Vol to let him carry out his plans. Not that we knew that, although I suppose in a lot of ways you could use Victario if he was around a bit more to help build him up, because he already sort of has that going for him. Victario's stories like the Blackest Monkey and whatnot, implying that Malachi is not what he seems. He's a really bad dude. And that works to a limited extent, but it could be a bit more. Especially because stories like the Blackest Monkey, they're in the library, and half the time you don't get them. So again, I know I've gone back to that several times, but that's still a problem. You need to get that out there, and if you could have it voice acted by Victario as well, that would be lovely. This is one of the other problems that I have. His plan and what he did to get into the beast, and the fact that he is the one who is inside the beast, is... it's not clear until much later and much closer to actually facing him, which is a shame, because he's the big bad. He should have more build up, and Act 4 is already very short. He needs more build up. We need to have more of an idea of what he's planning and what he's done to get there, sort of to motivate us to want to defeat him. That's like my big problem with that, other than the fact that his boss fight is like a visual mess, but that's a completely different subject. It also feels like it's a disconnect because, like I said earlier, we have a revenge quest sort of style of things. If you think about it, for Act 3, that makes sense. For Act 1, sort of getting there. For Act 2, it's, again, a mess. And then the fact that Malachi, who we assume is dead, we don't know what's gone on after the Purity Rebellion and the Cataclysm and that sort of thing. Why not have, like, more information here? It's a shame, and I'm not even sure what I would do to make Act 4 make sense for me in a story perspective, because it's such a disconnect, and I'm not sure how to tie it back into the game. That really bothers me. But yeah, that's really my thoughts about Path of Exile and its story so far. It's perhaps not the best analysis ever. That's just my opinion, and it's something that I think of when I play the game. It's probably the biggest thing that bothers me, and it's something that I would love to see them go back and fix, because after 3.0 comes out and we have all of this new content, it would be great to see them go back and polish the old content, but not just in a graphical and gameplay sense, but also in that story sense, because it's important to me, and I'm sure that it is important to a lot of other people. And while I can play the game and enjoy it perfectly fine without needing that to be on the next level and all working out. You know, it would just be icing on the cake. Just improve the whole experience, I believe. If we could have that stuff happen, it would... I just want it to be better. That's all. So that's my long and rambling views on Path of Exile and its story. Hopefully I've conveyed some sort of ideas here, and if you're interested in story at all, and you've got your own opinions, then I too would love to hear them, because, yeah, you may have noticed that I'm not exactly full of ideas, am I? So maybe you are. Maybe you could be the one to do a better job of this than I. So leave a comment, and I promise you that I'll read it, probably. Till next time.